Hi, welcome to Eat Love Garden. I'm Chef Cassidy Callenborn, your host for today, and we're going to be making a coconut minestrone using seasonal summer vegetables. So over here we have some onion, carrots, kale, zucchini, which is great in the summer, red bell pepper, celery, leeks, green beans, and potatoes. And then we're going to be flavoring the dish with a lot of fresh turmeric and ginger, and then also sauteing down some mushrooms to put in there. And then we have some Italian herbs, rosemary, peppercorn, and bay leaves to go in, along with some vegetable stock and peeled tomatoes. And then we're going to make it a little bit creamy and rich with this full-fat coconut milk. So I have the pan preheating here on a medium heat. I always put my hand over the pan first to kind of check on the heat. So I think this is almost ready. So one thing I really love about doing soups or one pot meals is with the prep work, instead of mincing everything first and setting all the vegetables aside, you can be a little bit lazy with it and kind of just throw everything in the pan. So I'm going to be preparing the vegetables and then just putting it straight in the pan to cook down. So we'll start with our onion here. The best thing to do is just trim off both edges. I like to keep a discard bowl nearby. This saves you some time instead of having to go over to the trash to get rid of your scraps. And then you can just cut this right in half and peel off the skin. So you don't need to cut these up too fine. I'm just gonna do a rough dice with these onions. But if you don't want bigger chunks of vegetables in here, you can definitely cut this up more finely. So I'm just going to get some olive oil to coat the pan. And then I'm just going to put this onion right in. And then when I'm cooking vegetables in the pan, you want to get some salt on them right away. Today we're using Good Tierra fine sea salt. So the salt not only acts as a flavoring agent, but it's going to help bring out the moisture in your vegetables when they're cooking, which is going to help the browning process. So that's something you definitely want to do early on whenever you're cooking with vegetables. So now we're gonna slice up some carrots and put it in there. For soups or stews or any type of like stock type situation, I always start with onions, carrots, and celery. This is a French technique called a mirepoix, which is basically 2 parts onion to 1 part carrot and celery, which is like the base for soups and stews. Typically for a mirepoix, it's cut up more finely into like an even dice, but the same principle still applies. It's just a flavoring base for a lot of different types of dishes. So for the carrots, I'm just gonna slice them up on a bias here. When you're doing this, just think about for the end product how you want to consume the soup. So like I said, some people don't want bigger chunks of vegetables in their soup. So you could definitely cut this up into a small dice. But for something like this, I like it a little bit heartier with the bigger chunks of vegetables. And you're also going to want to start sauteing your heartier vegetables before you do things like the zucchini, because this is much softer, so it's going to cook more quickly. So I have 1 onion in here and about 3 large carrots. And then I'm going to slice up the celery in a similar way, just some 1/2 to 1 inch pieces cut on a bias. And then we can get a little bit more of that salt in here. And I'm just going to turn the heat up a little bit. Since there's so much in here, it's bringing down the heat of the pan. So I have this on medium-high now. And I definitely want to get some good browning on these vegetables before I add any liquids. But in the meantime, we can prepare our other vegetables. So I have some leeks here, which have a similar flavor to onions, but they're really sweet. So I like to add these to soup. So what you can do with the leek is first you want to cut off this harder end piece. And I typically like to slice these. So what I'll do is cut it straight down the middle. And this way I end up with half moon shapes. So I'll cut all the way from the white part up until it starts to get green. Then I'll stop cutting there, but I'll turn it around and use some of the green parts. These are a little bit stemmy, so you want to cut them down a little bit more fine, but I like to have them for the color. So like I said, since this is a one-pot dish, this is all just going to go straight in. You don't have to be too specific with the cooking times of all of this, and you also don't need to be too specific with how you cut things. And we're already starting to get some browning on the bottom of the pan, which is good. We're going to get that up later by deglazing the pan with the liquids. I have a red bell pepper here that we're going to use. So with minestrone, what's so great about it is it's a really versatile recipe. You don't have to use all of these ingredients, especially if you were doing this in the winter time, for example. You can really use just whatever's in season. That's sort of like the idea behind how minestrone was developed. And it's an Italian dish, so that's kind of the idea of is using like fresh seasonal ingredients that you have on hand to make like an easy, quick, and nutritious meal. And for the red bell pepper, I'm just going to dice this up since we don't have as much of it, but it's still going to add some nice color to the dish. Okay, and then we have some green beans here. You could put these in whole, but what I like to do is just cut them a little bit, not into super small pieces, but maybe one that's this long into thirds. And again, I'll do this on a bias just for aesthetic purposes. Okay, all of this can go right in here. I'm just gonna give this a little bit more oil and a little bit more salt. Okay, while that's happening, we can start to prepare our mushrooms. So whenever I do mushrooms in a soup, I like to saute them separately on the side because they tend to get a little bit soggy if you just add it to the soup mixture. So I'll do this with chicken noodle soup as well. Sometimes if I want to have mushrooms or like a beef soup, I'll just saute them separately. And something a lot of people don't know about mushrooms is you obviously want to wash all of your vegetables before you use them. But with mushrooms, since they absorb so much moisture and water, you don't want to wash these with water. You just want to rub them gently with a damp cloth or a paper towel to get the dirt off. So I first got really into making this recipe when I was spending a lot of time in Bend, Oregon. I was spending winters up there for about a year. I think I spent about 2 winters there as I was like working for clients up there. And it's an area that gets a lot of snow. So I was really craving like some warm, nourishing foods. They also have a ton of great produce in Bend. So this is such a produce focused dish. This is something I like kind of got in the routine of making every time I took a trip up there and it was snowing. I would make like a big batch for myself and just eat this throughout the week. But of course, I like to put my own spin on it because traditionally the minestrone is not going to have coconut, ginger, and turmeric. But these are really healing ingredients, so it's also good to boost your immunity, especially in those like colder winter months. And then you can also, traditional minestrone usually has beans. I leave it out of this recipe just because I think the flavors from the ginger and turmeric don't go as well with beans, but you can definitely add those in if you would like to. So we have our mushrooms all clean, and I'm just gonna slice these up. And like I said, I have this pan going over here, so I'm just going to saute these with some olive oil on the side. So these can just go right in here. I'll give this a spin, just make sure everything's being good in here. And I'm just going to give this a splash of broth. Just because the vegetables are losing so much water, I don't want anything to get stuck to the pan. So with the mushrooms, I'm going to contradict what I said earlier about salting your vegetables. Mushrooms are the one exception. Like I mentioned, how they're like sponges and absorb so much water. They have a lot of water in them, so if you salt it early on, it's just going to remove all of the moisture from the mushrooms, and then they're going to shrivel up into nothing. You're going to be left with like some mushroom broth in here. So what I like to do with mushrooms is saute them first and add the salt at the end. Unless I'm making something like a cream of mushroom soup and I want to extract all that moisture from the inside of the mushrooms, but typically I just leave the salt till the end. So we're going to fully saute and caramelize these before we add any salt. And they do require a bit more moisture for cooking like more butter or oil than the other vegetables. So you just want to keep an eye on that, make sure your pan doesn't get too dry. And these vegetables have sweat down quite a bit, so I think we're ready to add our zucchini. And I'm going to cut these into a half moon shape. I don't want to go too thin on these zucchinis because they're a lot more delicate than the other vegetables in here. So if you cut them too thin, I think they'll sort of get lost in the soup and you won't really be able to taste them much or get any of their texture. So it's just going to go right in. So I'm keeping an eye on both pans here. With mushrooms, you do want to give them some time to have that surface area with the pan, so you don't need to stir it constantly, but every 1 to 2 minutes, I would say, just kind of mix things around, make sure it's not getting like fully stuck to the pan. They're already starting to look really good and caramelized. And for the soup, I think we're ready to add our liquid soon. So what I'm going to do is just add our last vegetable here, which is these potatoes. And I'm going to cut these into cubes. So I'm aiming to cut these potatoes in roughly the same size because this is one of the elements in here that you actually need to kind of pay close attention to the cooking time. All these vegetables have like gotten soft already. You definitely want your potatoes to soften up all together. If I have some bigger chunks in here and some smaller chunks, by the time the soup is done, the bigger pieces of potato won't be fully cooked through. So just try to manage that when you're chopping these up. And you'll notice when I'm cutting things up, I focus on one task at a time. So what I did was slice all of these potatoes before cubing them instead of doing one potato at a time. It really helps speed things up, and that applies to any task in the kitchen. The less hand movements you do, the more efficient you're going to be while you're cooking. Okay, let's get all of these in here. The potatoes aren't going to need much browning. You could get them a little bit browned if you wanted to, but for this dish, I just like them to kind of cook through in the liquids. And we're going to add our dinosaur kale at the very end because that cooks really quickly. It kind of just wilts in the liquid. So let's combine all of this here, and again, just keeping an eye on the mushrooms. These are looking good. Should be done in about 4 or 5 minutes. And at this point, we can go ahead and add in our liquids to the soup. So we have some whole peeled tomatoes here. These can go right in. These big chunks of tomato are gonna break up while it's cooking, so don't worry about that. You could blend it if you didn't wanna have bigger chunks, but I like to have some bigger pieces of tomatoes. And also you can use fresh tomatoes if you prefer, but like I said, I developed this recipe in the winter time, so I'm kind of just used to using these canned tomatoes. And then we can put all of our veggie stock in here. You can use chicken stock or beef stock if you prefer. I like to keep vegetable dishes vegetarian or vegan when I can, just so if you're, for example, feeding someone else this and they're vegetarian, you know, sometimes chicken stock or beef stock might have more flavor, but then a vegetarian person wouldn't be able to eat it. So what I'm going to do is just cut some long, thin slices of this ginger. I've made this in the past where I'll just do thin slices and throw it in so that it's more edible, but ginger is very stocky and kind of hard to chew on. So what we really want to do is just expose the flesh to get the flavor in here. And this is about 3 inches of ginger. You can adjust this based on your own preferences. Ginger is obviously a little bit spicy and strong if you're not used to eating it often, but it does have a lot of great health benefits. It's anti-inflammatory, it's great for digestion, so it's definitely something I love to incorporate into my recipes. And then we have some fresh turmeric here. I so much prefer fresh turmeric to turmeric powder. It has a really nice fragrant flavor, and we're just going to do the same thing, just expose the flesh. So we won't actually be eating these chunks of ginger and turmeric, but it's going to flavor the whole soup. And just be a little bit careful when you're working with turmeric. Keep in mind, like if you have white countertops or if you're wearing white clothing, this does stain very easily. So be mindful of that. And then we're just gonna add in a little bit more salt because we did add quite a bit of vegetables in here. We're gonna add some bay leaves, which is gonna give it some nice flavor. Some rosemary. Sometimes I prefer to use thyme. You can really just use whatever you have on hand. It's gonna give it a nice deep flavor because we have the bright elements, the ginger and turmeric, balanced out with these more savory, herby elements like the bay leaves and rosemary. I'm gonna add in some Italian seasoning, which is mostly just dried oregano and basil. And then we have some peppercorns here. So I'm just gonna grind these up in a mortar and pestle. You can use pre-ground pepper if you want, or you can use a pepper grinder. I like to have, for this recipe and certain recipes, bigger chunks of pepper. So I like to use a mortar and pestle, and it really helps bring out the oils and the flavor. So what you wanna do is just give it a little tap in the middle and then rotate it around. And just kind of go back and forth between those two motions. And you can also use a food processor or a coffee grinder or a spice grinder for this. For me, I like to do a lot of things by hand as opposed to using appliances, so I'm more than likely to break out my mortar and pestle before something like a spice grinder, unless I was doing really large quantities, say making this soup for 50 or 60 people. At that point I might want to take a little shortcut and grind the pepper in a spice grinder. But I definitely recommend using fresh pepper as opposed to pre-ground pepper. Obviously, if that's all you have, that's totally fine, or you can even omit the pepper if you don't like the flavor as much. But with pre-ground pepper, a lot of the oils have been lost since it's ground ahead of time. They kind of like seep out of the final product. So whenever you can use fresh pepper, that's definitely what I recommend. Okay, so we have this all ground up, and it's okay that there's some bigger chunks in here. That's kind of the nice thing about doing things like this by hand, is you can choose how coarse you want it. And that's all gonna go right in. And our mushrooms are looking pretty good. So at this point, I'm gonna turn the heat off on the mushrooms, add a little bit of salt like I mentioned, because they're pretty bland right now without the salt. But at this point, they're not gonna lose the moisture because it's already sealed in from the caramelization. We're gonna put these in at the very end with the kale. And I'm gonna go ahead and add in this coconut milk. So in here we have almost all of our ingredients except for our kale and mushrooms. We're gonna add those at the very end. Right now, I'm just gonna wait for this to kind of come up to a boil and then turn it down to a gentle simmer, and we're gonna let this simmer for 30 minutes or so, and then we'll be right back. I wanted to take a minute to thank my sponsor, Lazy Acres Natural Market. They have 6 locations in California and they carry lots of wonderful ingredients. As a private chef, I love shopping there, especially for fresh meats and produce and seafood. And then I also love getting my wellness products there. They carry a wide array of natural beauty products and essential oils. And they have some great community programs, one of them being the Enviro Tokens program. So if you bring in a reusable bag, they give you a token to donate some money to a charity of your choice. And then Lazy Acres also offers some wonderful cooking classes. So you can sign up for a fun night out. We offer adults classes and kids classes. We have a variety of chefs with different specialties. I teach at the Los Feliz location in the Sunshine Room. So if you want to come take a class with me, you can use this discount code Cassidy10. And very shortly, I'm also going to be offering a gift card giveaway on my Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram at Chef Cassidy K and watch out for a gift card opportunity. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, Lazy Acres, from the bottom of my heart. I'm so grateful to be a part of the family at Lazy Acres. You guys have been such a big support of my teaching career from day one, and I couldn't be more happy to work with you guys. Okay, so it's been about 25 minutes or so. We've just been letting this simmer without the lid on. The lid on or off is a personal preference. It doesn't matter really either way. More liquid is gonna evaporate. It'll be a little bit thicker without the lid. So if you wanna have it more soupy, you can put the lid on. So now we're ready for our final steps, which is just to add the mushrooms and the dinosaur kale. So what you wanna do with the kale is just remove this stem. You can just peel it off from the outer leaves. And then we're just gonna roughly chop this. I don't wanna cut this too small because it does wilt up quite a bit once it gets in the hot liquid. And you'll know your soup is done once your potatoes are soft. So what I did was just go in and prick it with a knife. You can do that with a fork if you prefer. And then you also want to taste it for seasoning before you move on to this final step. So I did taste it just to make sure there's enough salt in there and that the flavors have married together well. So we're gonna go ahead and add in our mushrooms. And at this point, I'm gonna turn off the heat on the soup. And then we can just stir the kale right in. So the kale doesn't really need to cook down in the soup. It's gonna wilt just from the heat of the liquid. So I'm just mixing everything together here. And I do just want to remind you guys, I left the bay leaves and the rosemary stems and the ginger and turmeric in here. Most people do know that to eat around those items, but just as a courtesy, you can let your guests know if you're serving this to other people, or you can always remove them. I like to leave it in because like I said, most people do know, and I like to show like what things flavored the dish. But just keep that in mind if you're serving other people. Typically, people aren't going to want to bite into this big stalk of ginger. And you can see the kale has already softened up quite a bit. So this is great, and we're ready to plate this up. So I have just a big bowl here. I'm gonna scoop out some veggies. And you can see how the tomatoes have broken down in here. I like that they're in big chunks like this. And then we'll get some of that nice turmeric coconut broth. So you can see the broth has taken on this nice orange color. That's from the combination of the tomatoes, the turmeric, and the coconut milk. And then you can just serve this up just like this. And this is also a dish that holds really well in the fridge. It'll last about a week in the fridge. If you don't finish everything, you can always freeze it and pull it out 6 to 12 months later. So it's a great dish to have on hand. Like I said, you can substitute any of the vegetables in here. It's really more of the steps and the process is what you want to focus on. So thank you guys so much for joining me today on Eat, Love, Garden. Thank you to my sponsor, Lazy Acres. There's 6 locations in California. You can find all of these ingredients at Lazy Acres. They carry tons of organic fruits and vegetables. And we also offer cooking classes. So if you'd like to come out to check out one of our cooking classes in the Sunshine Room in Los Feliz, you can use the discount code Cassidy10. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to cooking with you guys again. I spy one bluebird on a sunny day, high above me, lying in the shade. Are you passing? Are you here to stay? Goodbye, sweet bluebird, would you fly my bluebird nesting all your fear. The past is broken, future bright and clear. Time awaits you, time escapes. You must fly there, my bluebird, fly. I spy one bluebird on a summer day, high above me, lying in the shade. Are you passing? Are you here to stay? Goodbye, my bluebird, would you fly away? Away.